And now the judges can introduce themselves.
Hi. I guess good afternoon now. Congratulations. Hi. I guess good afternoon now. Congratulations, California, on making it to the national finals. Congratulations, California, on making it to the national finals. We'll introduce ourselves and ask you to do the same, and we'll get going. We'll introduce ourselves and ask you to do the same, and we'll get going. My name is Ben Glickman.
Issue.
Let's going. My name is Ben Glickman. What? I'm muffled?
Yeah, maybe if you want to try muting and going back. I don't know if everyone else hears that. It's a little bit, yeah.
Yeah, it's a little staticky.
Better? Is that any better? Is that any better?
Does anyone have any troubleshooting to
change my sound?
microphone?
Is this better?
Yes.
Yes,
That's much better.
Let's switch my microphone. All right. So my name is Ben Glickman. I'm an alumnus of this program. I represented California myself back in 1995. I work for the California Attorney General's office, and I'm on the Center for Civic Education's Board of Directors.
My name is Ali Khan. I am an attorney in Chicago. I too am an alum of the program like Ben, representing Illinois back in 1998.
Good afternoon. I'm Dan Taubman. I'm a senior judge on the Colorado Court of Appeals in Denver, Colorado, and I am not an alumnus of the program, but I've worked with the We the People program for many years.
Really
Please
nice
introduce.
Oh, I'm so sorry.
No, go ahead. Go ahead.
I'm so sorry. Okay, well, it's really nice to meet you all. We're so excited to have this discussion with you guys today. We're Irvington High School's Unit 3. I am Jade Wang.
I'm Delisha Kumar.
And I'm Jonathan Wu, and we would like to thank the judges, the timekeeper, and our coach, Mr. Martinez, for their time here today.
Great. And your question today is number 1. I do not think the United States would come to an end if we lost our power to declare an act of Congress void. I do think the Union would be imperiled if we could not make that declaration as to the laws of the several states. What impact has judicial review had on federalism? Is judicial review a counter-majoritarian practice? Please support your position. What limits, if any, would you place on the practice of judicial review?
In his 1905 dissenting opinion in Lochner v. New York, Justice Oliver Wendell Holmes argued the 14th Amendment should not be used to strike down popular legislation unless it infringed upon American principles. His dissent reflects the idea that the federal judiciary uses the power of judicial review to reinforce not the weather of the day, but rather the climate of the era. Such has been the case throughout American history, and since the 1930s, the use of judicial review has had a significant impact on federalism, leading to the expansive use of federal power to regulate the economy and protect individual liberties and rights.
The power of judicial review was first established in the 1803 case of Marbury v. Madison, reflecting the need to further centralize governmental power. Subsequently, the Marshall Court took broad interpretations of Congress's commerce as well as the necessary and proper powers, as established in the 1819 case McCullough v. Maryland and the 1824 case Gibbons v. Ogden. Above all, the 19th century judiciary primarily used judicial review to nullify state legislation that infringed upon private economic and contracting rights.
Following the Great Depression, public sentiment shifted in favor of increased government regulation of commercial activity, effectively ending the Lochner era, as the court began to view questions of commerce as non-justiciable and instead began using judicial review to primarily protect civil liberties. During this era, the Warren Court regularly struck down state enactments violating individual rights, as seen in the 1954 case Brown v. Board of Education.
Beginning in the 1980s, claims that the federal government had grown too large and too powerful, resulting in the court's Rehnquist revival, led to the 1995 case U.S. v. Lopez, where the court began narrowing the scope of Congress's commerce power when it ruled that the 1990 Gun-Free School Zones Act did not substantially affect interstate commerce.
Recently, the Roberts Court had continued to protect individual rights at the state level, especially those concerning religious freedom, as seen in the 2021 case South Bay Pentecostal Church v. Gavin Newsom, which ruled that California's prohibition on indoor worship was unconstitutional. However, this court has also demonstrated a willingness to constrain federal power over voting rights, as seen in the 2013 case Shelby County v. Holder.
The term countermajoritarian difficulty was coined by Yale University professor Alexander Bickel. He argued that giving unelected judges the power to overrule the actions of an elected legislature was not only illegitimate, but undemocratic. While we agree judicial review is a countermajoritarian practice, we also acknowledge that historically judicial review has been used to further American ideals. And while judicial review presents the opportunity for countermajoritarian decisions, the majority of the court's decisions historically have been in line with public sentiment, as reflected in a 2008 study from the University of Chicago.
The power of judicial review must be limited in order to prevent the erosion of the court's institutional integrity. The judiciary is the weakest branch of government, as it has neither force nor will. Therefore, justices are often careful not to offend the dominant political institutions. While most judges claim to be impartial, they are often persuaded by the prevailing political climate.
Currently, Supreme Court justices are not bound to an ethical code of conduct, leading to issues over the recusal process. Therefore, we believe Congress should pass H.R. 1, the For the People Act. Section 7001 of this bill would hold the justices to the same code of conduct as their lower court counterparts. While judicial review can potentially upset the majority will, we do not believe any other limits are necessary. Thank you.
Thanks. I want to pick up on the counter-majoritarian problem. Is that anti-democratic or undemocratic, or is there an argument that it actually furthers democracy?
Okay. The way that the framers intended our democracy to be structured is having a democracy that still has limits. So, for example, although we have a democratically elected legislature, having a counter-majoritarian judiciary is essential because it helps check popular passions. Because there is no other branch, like the Supreme Court the judiciary is the unique branch that upholds constitutionality. No other branch does that, and by doing so, it maintains and furthers democratic ideals.
And we've seen with Supreme Court rulings that that judicial review has had this net positive effect on society by using their counter-majoritarian rulings in order to protect minority rights, as we've seen in contemporary cases such as the 2020 Supreme Court case of Bostock v. Clayton County, where they ruled that sex discrimination in the workplace under Title VII of the Civil Rights Act of 1964 protected individuals, LGBTQ individuals as well.
Additionally, when the courts have been counter-majoritarian, oftentimes they're doing so to protect the rights of minorities from the majority. For example, the 1967 case Loving v. Virginia extended the fundamental right of marriage to interracial couples as well. And a Gallup poll done at the time found that only 24% of Americans supported interracial marriage. So even though this case was counter-majoritarian, we see that the courts did so in order to protect the rights of minorities.
Can you give us some examples where the courts have decided cases that were not in favor of the rights of minorities? And why do you think the court decided those cases in that way?
So another case that was counter-majoritarian, that did not protect the rights of the minority, I would say would be in the case of 2017 Colorado Civil Rights Committee versus Masterpiece Cake Shop, where they found that the minorities of the LGBTQ individuals, that under the First Amendment, they were able to be denied service under religious exemptions. And the reason why the court decided to do this was because they found that the Colorado Civil Rights Commission was discriminatory against religious beliefs. And that's why they ruled in favor of the baker instead of the couple that came in.
Similarly, this case exemplifies how the Roberts Court represents the climate of the era. So basically, the Roberts Court has continually protected rights in terms of religious freedoms, and they continue to do so in the Masterpiece Cake Shop decision.
even historically, the courts sometimes have had blunders, and like our judge said, they may not protect the rights of minorities. Most notably, the Supreme Court case Dred Scott v. Sanford declared that the Missouri Compromise, as well as the Compromise of 1850, were unconstitutional, and this effectively let slavery spread out into the West and out from the South. And I believe they did so because the issue of slavery has been contentious since the founding of our nation. And at that point, the courts, or before that point, the courts have refused to answer the question of slavery. And so I believe this case was the court's answer to the question of slavery.
Okay. One thing I want to ask, and it's to a little different direction here, but often is tied into when we talk about the power of federal courts and judicial review, is do you believe there should be term limits placed on Supreme Court justices?
I believe placing 18-year term limits on Supreme Court justices and then moving them down with senior status to a lower appellate court can help ensure that Supreme Court justices do not violate ethical code conducts such as like choosing not to recuse themselves, as we've seen in the past. Because by having 18-year term limits and moving these justices down, a lot of justices right now refuse to recuse themselves because they believe that there will be an 4-4 split on the court, and thus important questions won't get answered. So by having justices that are moved down to senior status, you're going to have a docket of people that you can pull from and put back onto the court if there are recusals.
How did you land on 18? I'm curious.
This is a proposal from Fix the Courts, which is a nonpartisan organization working to heal partisanship in the Supreme Court.
I would agree with my colleague that this 18-year term limit would be a good decision, as it would also make justices more responsive to what the majority of people would want. As we've seen with Supreme Court justices that have had longer terms, this may cause them to differ from what the majority or the common people want, rather than being more responsive and listening to what.
But isn't that problematic? Isn't the whole point to protect from the tyranny of the majority?
Yes, it's important that it protects from the tyranny of the majority, but it also is important to make sure that they at least acknowledge these ideas that the majority are concerned about.
Additionally, it's also really important to consider the fact that the judiciary has no enforcement powers, as Hamilton describes in Federalist 78. The court has neither force nor will. And so a lot of the court's power comes from their institutional integrity and the Americans' support of their Supreme Court decisions. And so it's a difficult balance that the Supreme Court has to take between upholding what the constitutionality of law is and what the people would also like to see.
Can you give some examples of that? That's an interesting concept. Some examples of where the outcome of a court case seemed to reflect the fact that the court was aware of its lack of enforcement power. In other words, where that lack of enforcement power may have tempered a court's decision. Can you give any examples?
One such example of a Supreme Court deferring to what the popular majority wanted are the delays on making a ruling on same-sex marriage. So there were actually cases brought to the Supreme Court before Obergefell v. Hodges. However, the Supreme Court was well aware that they were going to have the American Care Act come before them, and because these were two very hyper-partisan issues, they decided that they would wait until later to hear the same-sex marriage case, and so they waited until Obergefell to pass a ruling.
You mentioned in your opening statement that judges claim to be impartial, which struck me with interest since I am a judge. But I wanted to ask you if you think judges are impartial.
Off the hook.
Let's give a round of applause for the students for all their hard work. All right, and now the judges have some feedback for you.
Sure. I'll go first. Nice job. Congratulations. I thought your prepared portion, you covered a lot of ground. You had, it was easy to follow and well structured, and you had lots of support for all aspects of the question. I might have liked to hear a bit more on the counter-majoritarian issue. I mean, you had Bickle, which was great. You had the notion that the court's decisions further American ideals. I might have liked to hear a bit more about that, like that the fact that they're counter-majoritarian is actually a feature, not a bug. We got into it more in the Q&A, but I might have liked to hear a bit more of that. I did like that you mentioned that study that apparently was done, that most of the decisions track public opinion, because I think that is right. And that led in very nicely, I thought, to your discussion of how it lacks enforcement power, and how I think those two kind of go hand in hand. I think the court is well aware that it can't get too far out on a limb, right? On the Q&A, I thought we had an engaging and fun conversation. And again, you had you were responsive to the questions, and you had a good use of supporting authority. You weren't just giving us your opinions where you could. You were interjecting with cases and other support. So I thought that was good. Yeah, that's all I really have. I thought you guys did a nice job overall, and I really enjoyed the conversation.
I agree with everything Ben said. I think he did a great job, a great use of supporting evidence. Very specifically, I really liked the fact when it came to the question about term limits, it appears that you had thought it through rather than say yes or no. You had a proposed year and thought about it and cited where even you had kind of gotten the theory from. I really appreciated that. I think that was, demonstrates a lot of thoroughness and research. So great job.
I agree that your presentation was really good. You had a lot of good specific information in your opening statement, including references to Marbury v. Madison, McCulloch v. Maryland, Givens v. Ogden, and discussion of the Warren Court, the Lopez case. So that gave us a good historical overview about judicial review. With regard to your proposal to place limits on the judiciary and having the ethical code apply to Supreme Court justices, and then saying in response to questions, well, if there were an 18-year term limit, then that would help. Maybe that's so, but it's not intuitively clear to me why judges who serve more than 18 years would be more likely to have ethical issues presented to them than judges who had served less than 18 years. I mean, there have been a number of judges who served far more than 18 years without anybody raising ethical issues about them. But there have also been some, as you know, where ethical issues have been raised. I particularly like your citation to the Loving case and the Gallup poll in terms of the Supreme Court going contrary to public opinion. Many years ago, I heard Justice O'Connor speak, and she said that she thought that was one of the most important decisions of the Supreme Court because of that very Gallup poll that you mentioned, and that she thought that the Supreme Court was going out beyond public opinion in making its decision in that case. I also want to have a special comment about your reference to the Masterpiece K case, because I actually wrote the opinion in that case that was reviewed by the Supreme Court. And it was very unusual to have a decision from an intermediate court of appeals on which I served go all the way to the US Supreme Court. But the Supreme Court actually decided the case on the basis that the Colorado Civil Rights Commission or two of its commissioners seemed like they were hostile to religion. And that issue was not raised in our court, in the Court of Appeals. It was not the reason the Supreme Court decided to hear the case, and it was not briefed by the parties. So it was an unusual decision by the Supreme Court, and you could say that went against the trend of counter-majoritarianism. A lot of people interpreted the Supreme Court's decision as a very narrow decision because it didn't decide on the merits in favor of the Bakers over the gay couple. But I was pleased to see you talk about that case. Another case that didn't protect the rights of minorities that you might have mentioned was the Korematsu case decided during the Second World War, which shows that even though the Supreme Court protects the rights of minorities, often it doesn't always do that. And my last comment is that when you say judges claim to be impartial, I was going to ask you whether they actually have different views based upon different judicial philosophies, or whether you think some of them are in fact partial. So, but overall, I think you did a really good job. You had lots of good information and thoughtful answers to all of our questions.
Very, very